Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. It's summer. It's the end of May. Well, I say it's summer, but it's the end of May here, and we're still waiting in Dublin for summer to actually arrive. I mean, if your idea of summer is grey skies and wind and it not being that warm, this is the place to be. If, on the other hand, you have some crazy idea that summer should involve some sunshine and warm weather, well, Mother Nature has let us down so far. I don't know where she is. She's probably on holiday somewhere else, where it's warm and sunny, lounging in her hammock, drinking a pina colada, while we're here. We're like, come on, make it happen. We deserve a bit of sunshine. We deserve some warm air. And look, if the consequence of that is mild drought, then so be it, because in the 5 months since 2024 began, and I looked this up, by the way, this is not just me making up a random stat. We have had more rainfall in 2024 than the entire planet has had in the 2 trillion years that it has been in existence, or whatever it is, 7 billion. There or thereabouts anyway. I mean, it's millions or billions. It's not 6,000. All right. But look, I'll wait. I'm a patient guy. I can bide my time with the best of them. But it better get here soon. That's all I'm saying. It's quiet enough, I suppose you would say, from an Arsenal perspective. Everyone's on their holidays. I read in the paper today, Mikel Arteta went on holidays. He went off and got an award this week. Did you see that? He got an award from Soccer Conglomerate Inc. or something as Coach of the Year. There was a picture of him with Xabi Alonso and Cesc Fabregas, a pretty decent Spanish trio, you would have to say. If they were on your five-a-side team, you would probably win. That's all I'm saying. Even if you had fucking Billy No Legs in goal, you'd win. And Edu is on holidays as well. So, look, they're entitled to take a bit of time off. They said in the article they're expected back before the end of June. I was like, I think they'll be back before that, to be honest. They've got a fair amount to do. Incomings, outgoings, other things. I can't tell you exactly what they are. They're top secret. They swore me to say, no, I'm kidding. But look, they've a job of work to do this summer to get us ready for pre-season and to get us ready for the new season. So there hasn't been much going on in the way of news. However, it's a Friday. You need a podcast and you need some Arsenal stuff to listen to. By the way, if you haven't had a chance already, we do have our player ratings podcast over on Patreon. That's a good 90-minute listen. Myself and Lewis Ambrose going player by player and giving each player a rating out of 10. Some players didn't get any ratings because they didn't play enough, but we went through the entire squad and some good numbers in there. So if you fancy listening to that, you can sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/Arseblog. Before we get into today's chat, at the end of the podcast, I will give you the winners of the book competition from the Arsecast 2 weeks ago. I didn't do one last week, so I couldn't pick the winners. So we have the winner of the book, Is Yours Gold. Stay tuned to see if you are the lucky winner of that particular book. For now, though, let's get on with the show and to talk about whatever the hell is going on. I'm delighted to welcome back from the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, it's Harry Symeou. Hi, Harry.
Hello, Andrew. How's it going?
It's going all right. How's your summer so far?
Yeah, it's not really started yet. I thought that things would die down straight away as soon as the season ended. It's not been the case. I'm not complaining, but I don't feel like I've had the opportunity to put my feet up just yet. How about yours?
Yeah, I had like a couple of days last week and now we're back into the swing of things and there's just so much going on. And I suppose that brings me to the first thing I want to talk about, is sort of the demands on players these days. And this might tie in with something else that's been going on this week, a story about how the EFL Cup might be seeded. We'll maybe talk about the details of that, but part of the rationale for that was the extended Champions League format, the Club World Cup coming up, and just the space in the schedule for all of these games. And Andrew Allen has just put together a piece on Arseblog News because the Euros is coming up, of course. And what I wasn't kind of aware of were the friendlies that are going to be taking place next week as well. So these guys have had maybe a week, 10 days off, maybe not even that because they've had to report for international duty. And they're going to play friendlies, then they're going to play European competitions. as ever, it's one of those where we go, we've got to give the players a bit more time off. We've got to give them more rest. We've got to protect them. We've got to look after them physically. Managers talk about it. Players' organizations talk about it. But every year there's just more. There's more football. There's more tournaments. There are more, even the clubs themselves, with the pre-seasons that they undertake, demand more of the players. I'm curious as to what you think the solution might be for this, because it's one of those where it's very hard to close a stable door after the horse is bolted. I thought it was interesting last year a couple of times, Mikel Arteta spoke about having to have bigger squads, that might be the solution. Like, the football is going to happen because all the external demands from fans, from the associated people who make a lot of money off football, from broadcasters, advertisers, sponsors, partners, all that kind of stuff, that's never going to go away. So is there some logic to what Mikel Arteta is saying in there that you might need in reality to cope with all the domestic and international football? Bigger squads, you're looking rather than 25, maybe 28, 30 players.
I think that is the only way, really, because as you say, when you look at all the external factors and the powers that be, and obviously their goals and ambitions are to put more football games on to generate more revenue by selling the rights to TV broadcasters and in all the other various ways that they make money, it just never feels like that's going to go away. My problem is that there is too much football. Like, I genuinely feel like there's too much football. And I am someone who loves the game. I will sit on a Sunday night and watch Serie A after I've watched a whole weekend of Premier League football. And it drives my wife absolutely crazy. But even me, at points now, there are times where I look at it and I go, I just don't fancy watching football tonight. Like, I'm just going to take a night off because there are so many competitions, too many competitions, in my opinion. I think one of the problems we have in England specifically as well, Andrew, is that we have 2 domestic cups. Yeah. A lot of countries don't have 2 domestic cups anymore. There are a lot of countries that had 2, but, downsized it to 1. They thought that was the smarter way to go. And I guess, look, I watched, for example, the UEFA Europa Conference League final last night, and you look at the scenes and the excitement and a team have won it that wouldn't get an opportunity to win a Europa League or a UEFA Champions League. So on that hand, you look at it and you say, well, that's a positive, having that extra competition, because it gives us opportunities to see moments like that. West Ham experienced it last season, for example. But at the same time, if you're asking players to play too many games, I think you're badly impacting on the level at which they're able to perform week in, week out. And so actually, are you benefiting the game, or are you lowering the standard by asking these guys to do too much? I feel like it's more like the latter. The standards have been impacted, in my opinion. We've seen really big players who have often been consistent for 2/3 of a season, sometimes in that period just before the run-in, looking like they've run out of gas. And I don't want to see that. You've got to take care of the players. And the international tournaments coming in the summer too just make it almost impossible to perform and to produce at the highest level.
Yeah, and of course, there's players from all around the world playing in every league in the world, so there are impacts, everywhere. I take your point about, the Europa Conference League. Like, would anybody really miss it if it wasn't there? I don't think so. Is it great for West Ham, Olympiacos? The scenes looked amazing after they won it. I mean, you don't want to take things like that away from fans, but you also have to protect, the players who play. And like you said, the standard of the game, where what used to be maybe a 9.5 month season is now 11.5 months or 10.5 months. And it's difficult to find the solutions. Just to bring it back to the 2 cup competitions in England, you hear people talk about, well, what about if you're a club that is qualified for Europe, you don't get to enter the EFL Cup, the Carabao Cup, or whichever particular sponsor is involved in that. Is that a solution that's fair? Because, look at the winners of the Carabao Cup over the last number of years. Man City have won it so many times, and Liverpool have won it. And, these are experiences that their fans will cherish and enjoy and remember for a long time. But there's also the idea that, in tandem with this new suggestion that they're going to seed this competition so the big teams stay away from each other, which makes it more and more likely that a Big 6 or a Big 8 team will win this competition. And they already win it every year anyway, like making it easier for them doesn't seem right or fair to me. I think one of the beauties of cup football is that it throws up these draws, which, you know, can just, I don't know, they can go in different directions. You can have two big teams that meet each other, which paves the way for a smaller club to get a bit further in the competition and maybe all the way to a final. Like, it seems to me like that might be a way of maintaining interest in a competition, which, you know, for the most part, you'll hear top six fans, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but they will look at it and say, well, do we really want to put our best team out in the EFL Cup when we've got an important league game at the weekend? We don't want to sacrifice all these kind of things that you hear. Like, excluding the teams from Europe, it might not be fair, but it might make it a more interesting competition and obviously give somebody else a chance to win something in the season.
Yeah, I think that is a good potential solution, to take the teams that are in Europe out of the EFL Cup, for example. You know, you can't have managers like Jurgen Klopp, and I'm using Jurgen Klopp as an example because he does this all the time, coming out and complaining about fixture schedules, complaining about kickoff times. And you know, at one stage, he didn't even turn up, did he, to an EFL Cup game? He sent his assistant to handle it because he thought that, you know, it wasn't worth his time and that there was no break on offer to Liverpool at that point. You can't have it both ways. You either want to be in those competitions, which means you're going to play more games because there's a bigger, superior club with greater finances and greater resources. You can afford a bigger squad than most. So you either take it on the chin, or you just say, we're fine. We won't play in those competitions. And as you say, it makes the competition more interesting. Cup football, the special thing about cup football, as you say, is that paths can be created for sides that are unfancied. And if you start seeding it the way that they're saying they're going to, then yeah, you might get the bigger profile final, which is ultimately what the TV companies want to pay for and what the global audience probably wants. But you also take away the magic of cup football. And, you know, I don't want to see that happen. So I don't agree with the seeding thing. I think if you're going to take the European sides out, full stop, then I'm fine with that. But they can't have it both ways. You know, you can't have a manager at the end of the season complaining that an opportunity to win a trophy wasn't there for him, and therefore, you know, he's going to come under scrutiny from his owners or from his fans, but then at the same time complain about the fixtures. This is the way football's going. So to circle back to your initial point, build a bigger squad if you want to compete on multiple fronts, or maybe we look at the solution of taking the European sides out and that be that.
Yeah. I mean, the rationale for this seeding thing is apparently to ease the fixture pileup prompted by the extended Champions League format. So as we know, rather than play 6 games, you're going to play 8 games, and those are going to be demanding games. And I think the league format will be more demanding than a group format, obviously, because you can win basically 3 games in a group at the start, and you're more or less assured of qualification, get a point in one of your other games, and you're probably through, right? But because this is a league format, you could have a lot of draws, you could have, you know, fair amount of equalization across this table. You might not know whether you're going to qualify until the 7th game or the 8th game, and that does put demands on squads and does put demands on managers and players to take games more seriously. Like, if you win your first 6, probably you're all right, and then you can doss around if you want for the final 2. But you know, this changes made elsewhere are having ripple effects on other competitions and across the game itself.
You're absolutely right. The point about the new Champions League format that has really kind of hit home with me over the last few days when I've been thinking about it is exactly what you mentioned. The fact that the table is going to change so dramatically after every match week because there's so few games that a win can probably propel you right up the table. And although, you know, that means that there's going to be jeopardy all the way through, which is, I think, what UEFA want. They want it to be exciting. They want it to be interesting. You're just, as a fan, you're going to struggle to keep track of how that's looking. You're going to struggle to know what a good result is, what a bad result is, aside from the obvious win, lose, and draw. You know, in terms of if you go away and get a point somewhere that's, you know, quite challenging on paper, you might come away thinking that's good. But actually, if another couple of teams below you win, then all of a sudden it doesn't look like a good result. There's not enough time for a league table to actually take shape because it's just 8 games.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be so difficult to keep track of.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it plays out. Like, if it is more exciting, if it is more competitive right the way through to the 8 games, then I suppose it's doing its job. But, it is just 2 more games, and then there might be 2 playoff games before you get into the knockout stages as well. So, what we're asking of these professional footballers, and we know they're athletes, and we know they're very well paid, and there'll be people sitting here maybe thinking, well, I'd take their money and I'd play that football, but it's not quite like that. They are humans, and there's only so far they can go. So we'll.
The other thing, though, Andrew, is like, say for example, let's say you're an Arsenal fan, right, and you've been saving up and you want to do one of these European away trips. And, Arsenal are going somewhere and they're going to have to rotate as a consequence of the fixture pile-up and the number of games, the sheer volume of games that they've got to deal with. You might travel halfway across Europe and turn up and see a rotated team, which as a fan, you're probably not going to like. Now, I know that is a possibility in the group stages as well, particularly if you book, I don't know, to go to the 5th or 6th game in the group stages, you might get that. But it just feels like it's all so unknown. And the more I talk about it and the more I think about it, I know that this is what UEFA want. But for fans, I think it's going to be a real big adjustment kind of mentally. And maybe in time we'll get used to it and think this is great. But at the beginning, I think it's going to be so difficult to keep a track of what is going on, to try and predict what you need to take seriously, what you don't, and just how that table is going to look. Because with 8 games and 24 teams, it's literally going to be changing every second, every time a goal goes in.
Yeah. I mean, that point about, rotated squads might be something we get used to if you do have a squad that's bigger. And I suppose the thing about when we talk about increasing the squad, it's not as if there aren't the players there right now. Arsenal had a squad of 25 players last season, but ultimately there was a core group who played most of the games, particularly as we got into the final stages of the season when stakes were high. And this is a discussion point that happens a lot around Mikel Arteta and, trusting his squad and using the players, and does he need more players? And maybe he does, and maybe that's going to be part of what we do this summer. But maybe growing used to the idea that squad rotation for various games. I mean, how do you prioritize? You know what I mean? It's not like there are any easy games in the Premier League. I know we had some big wins last season. Okay, so if you're playing Sheffield United, it's an easy game. But as we saw this season, you can play West Ham and it's a fucking easy game. But then the other time you play West Ham, it doesn't go quite that way, does it? So, the quality is such in the Premier League that you might look at a fixture and say, yeah, maybe we'll go all in on Europe this week and then we'll rotate it around at the weekend for the league. And then you have to deal with accusations of not taking things seriously. And that balancing act, I think, is going to be tricky for not just Mikel Arteta, but other managers.
For sure. And the other thing as well is that, how do you prioritize? Because you could finish 3rd or 4th in this new Champions League format, still make it through to the next round. And, what's the incentive really if you've got a big Premier League game to come, for example, to try and go from 4th to 2nd or 1st? Is it going to make that much of a difference in terms of what you face in the next round, given that a load of teams are going to be involved in a playoff round between then and your next game? To me, it's so difficult to to plan. It's so difficult to figure out. Now you go into a group, you've got 6 games, who your opponents are, the order of the fixtures, and you can just take it as it comes. And very often you can go into the second half of the fixtures, so the last 3, knowing exactly what you need to do and prioritize. You can see what you've got coming in the Premier League. But because this table, I know I keep making this point, but because this table is going to be constantly changing, you can't do that. You can't look at it and say, well, this is enough, that's enough. You just won't know at that stage. And you're right, Mikel Arteta's had a lot of grief, I think, in sort of listening to kind of people's season reviews and stuff. One of the common criticisms that I've heard is he doesn't take the Cups seriously and that he needs to do better in the Cups. But then, is that to the detriment of the Premier League? Is that to the detriment of what you achieve in Europe? And then you throw this new format into the mix. I think it becomes even more difficult to set out your priorities and make sure that you stick to those. Yeah. I just don't think you can ever satisfy everybody.
No, it's true, because it's like you've got to rotate. You've got to use your squad more. Okay, we're playing in the EFL Cup. I'll rotate. I use my squad more. And we ended up, losing to West Ham. It happens. That's one of the dangers, I suppose, or one of the risks that you take when you do rotate your squad with players who are maybe a bit more on the fringes, or players who, let's be frank about it, aren't quite as good as the players who start games in the Premier League. That's why the EFL Cup is an opportunity for them. I don't buy into the idea that Arteta doesn't take the Cup seriously. I don't believe that for a second. I think he has come to this club to set standards, and he's come also from a club like Man City, who, despite being the winning behemoth that they are, and we know all the reasons, they still go the distance quite often in cup competitions. Just lost in the FA Cup final. They were in the FA Cup final last year. They've won the League Cup so many times under Pep Guardiola. So I don't really buy that he doesn't take those cup competitions seriously. Last season we lost to Liverpool, played really well, but didn't get the goals, and then Liverpool sucker punched us at the end. It's Liverpool in the third round. It's not Hartlepool. And
last year it was Man City. So when he got Arsenal to the point where they were in a position to maybe start spreading themselves across various competitions, we've just been incredibly unlucky with the draws.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And that, again, is like what we're talking about with cup football. Like, you could get Hartlepool, then Northampton, then Colchester, then Swansea or whoever, and have an easy run all the way to the final. But even then, do you remember 2014 where we beat Spurs? I think we beat Liverpool. And did we have to beat maybe Everton as well? And then you're looking at semi-final against Wigan with a potential cup final against Hull. You're looking at that going, no problem. No problem. Cast your mind back, and it was actually a lot more challenging than we would have liked. And, we came very close maybe to the end of the Arsene Wenger era well before it actually came to pass. But just onto Arteta and talking about the job he's doing and what he's done. And I think, he will be the first to say he wants to win the cups. He wants to build a squad that will compete in the League Cup, the FA Cup, the Premier League and the Champions League. That is what he is doing and what he's trying to do. So the reports this week are that discussions are underway over a new long-term contract. To me, it's possibly the biggest no-brainer I can think of. There are always issues around a football club, always talking points, discussion points. This one just seems the most obvious to me, that the work he's doing is far from complete, and making sure that he remains here to fulfill, I don't want to say fulfill his destiny or something wanky like that, but you know what I mean? I think he might consider it something like that, but it makes all kinds of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been lucky enough to cover Arsenal throughout last season for BBC London, and I was always sort of knocking around in the sort of interview areas after the games and stuff, and got to speak to Mikel Arteta and people that work behind the scenes at the club on many occasions, and I never ever got the sense that anybody was panicked or nervous about the fact that his contract looks like it, there's not quite that long to run on it anymore, and that it is obviously time the negotiations take place over a new one. I think the focus was on trying to finish the season as strongly as possible. There was never any doubt that, what happened between now and the end of the season, or that point in the end of the season, was ever going to make a difference to Arteta's intentions. Everybody at the club is bought in on him. He is bought in on the project. There's no doubt about that. And I think, look, there's been reports that he's going to earn something like 10 million a year, which would make him the most highest paid Arsenal manager of all time. People like to throw that around. I think that's a bit of a silly thing to throw around, to be honest, because at the end of the day, as football moves on, players are getting paid more nowadays, managers are getting paid more, and so you're going to get paid more than someone that was in the job when Arsene Wenger was. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a stage, Andrew, in the project where there is no longer any questions about whether or not this is the right project and whether or not we're moving in the right direction. So it makes perfect sense to tie down the person that is at the center of this project, that is orchestrating this project. I know Edu plays a massive part, and there are other people at the club that do too. But Mikel Arteta embodies everything about where Arsenal want to be and how they're going to get there. And so sign him up, do it now. And if he wants 12 million, if he wants 15 million, give it to him, because we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, look, I think you look at that and think that's an awful lot of money to pay a manager, but you can be guaranteed that there are managers earning close to that. I'm sure Klopp and Guardiola were earning plenty. And look, Arsenal have players in the squad on 15, 16 million pounds a year based on their weekly salaries. I don't think in that sense 10 million for Mikel Arteta is outrageous by any means, because in large part he is responsible for putting this squad together, the progression that we've made, increasing the value of these players, if you want to talk about it from a transfer perspective, but also because of what they have contributed under his tutelage or under his management. It's raised their own ability to ask for salary. So when Bukayo Saka goes to sign a new deal and he says, well, I'm playing every week, I'm scoring lots of goals, I'm making lots of assists, this is a team that's not necessarily built around me, but I'm a cornerstone of this team. In order to commit my future to this football club, I want this amount of money. And nobody blinks because everyone says, well, it's Saka, give him what he wants. And that's true of our best players, whether it's Martin Odegaard or William Saliba or Ben White or Gabriel or all of them. Nobody blinks twice about what a player earns if the perception of what they're doing on the pitch is that they're earning that money. And I think the same absolutely applies to Mikel Arteta.
And if you zoom out from the kind of player situation for a second as well, and you look at the overall sort of health of the club right now, you look at how many commercial deals they've managed to bring in over the last couple of years as a knock-on effect of the good work that Mikel Arteta and his players have done on the pitch. You look at last season, Arsenal were the story. With all due respect, nobody outside of Manchester City fans really cares about Manchester City. I know that sounds horrible to say, but there's so many questions about how they've got to where they've got to. And I'm not saying they're guilty or they're not. I don't know is the honest answer to that. But, we're in a place now where Arsenal are the story. And having all the eyes on Arsenal increases our sort of value as a football club in a multitude of ways, and Mikel Arteta has been a big part of that. So, you got to give him credit for the transformation of the entire club from the ground all the way up.
Yeah, I think the other thing to point out, really, when you think about this and when you think about, how you continue to make progress and how you continue to develop and hopefully win the trophies we all want to win. Stability is one of those buzzwords in football that people will say, well, it's important, and other people will argue, well, it doesn't really matter. Like, look at what Chelsea did. They had no stability. They had managers who won the double and then they fucking sacked them. They built success on a kind of merry-go-round of managerial change, right? So there's no one way of doing it. But I think there is now, across football, there is something interesting about the managerial situation in that it doesn't strike me that there is like a what's the word I'm looking for here? A surplus of really, really good managers out there. Look at the Bayern Munich situation, right? Bayern Munich, one of the biggest clubs in Europe. The Bayern Munich job is one of the most prestigious jobs in world football. And when Thomas Tuchel fell out with them and they fell out with him, they tried this guy and that guy and this guy and that guy and this guy, and they got knocked back to the point where they tried to sort of mend fences with Tuchel because they were so desperate to put somebody in place. And in the end, they appoint Vincent Kompany, whose job at Burnley, he did a good job to get them promoted. Did he do a good job last season because they got relegated? Maybe you could argue his sticking to his principles was in no small way responsible for Burnley's relegation, because I think if he had tweaked things a little bit, he could potentially have kept them up if you ask your goalkeeper to do things a little differently, for example. So I think that is indicative of a market where the candidates aren't really out there. And when you hear other clubs, and I know we can laugh at Chelsea all we want, and it's funny, and they're a mess, and hopefully they continue to be a mess forever and ever. But, when you hear Chelsea say they're looking at what Arsenal did under Mikel Arteta, Manchester United, I see sometimes the debates among their fans, well, Arsenal gave Arteta all this time, they should give Ten Hag time. Like, there is this idea that if you kind of replicate what Arteta did and has done at Arsenal, that you have got a blueprint for success. I don't think it's that easy. You have to have the right man. You have to have the right people around him and the right circumstances at the football club. But, the idea that Arsenal would say, well, Mikel Arteta, you've taken us so far, let's go get somebody else. Like, who the fuck is out there? Like, what are we doing? Bringing in Rob Edwards? All due respect to Rob Edwards, nice guy, handsome man, good coach, did a great job at Luton, but is he that guy? And I think that really has to play a part in how you view the Arteta situation and the club's, I suppose, the responsibility to itself to secure the future of a manager, because there are other clubs out there. There's other big clubs, to secure his future in a market where those outstanding candidates just really aren't there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where you need to give our owners credit. I mean, we've had our issues with KSE in the past, right? I was one of the first people to be outraged when, for example, the Super League thing came along. But the way they've allowed Mikel Arteta to work and built a team around him that supports him rather than hinders him, I think is something that we can look at and praise them for. The difference between the situations like Chelsea and Bayern Munich that you referenced there, they've looked at it and gone, well, if I can bring in a manager that is big on culture, and I can bring in somebody who has got a philosophy, then maybe we can replicate something like what Arsenal have done. The difference is Mikel Arteta has much more control. He's not a head coach anymore. He's signed as a head coach, but he's now a manager. The problem with Chelsea and Bayern Munich, for example, is that they want everything that Arsenal have got from Mikel Arteta, but they don't want to give anybody the keys. They don't want to give anybody the control to be able to input on decisions like who you sign, who you sell, who you bomb out of the club if they're misbehaving or whatever. Like, they don't want to give that kind of autonomy to anybody, but they're hoping to replicate what Arsenal have. And it's so easy to look at Arsenal from the outside in and say, well, they've got a sporting director in Edu who's doing brilliantly, and they've got Arteta doing all the on-the-field stuff, and that's the winning combination. There is so much more to it. The dynamic is so much more complex than that. And add into the equation that whoever you give that control to has to be as incredibly talented as Mikel Arteta is. It's not an easy thing to replicate. And I said it on the radio the other day, I feel like Mikel Arteta should open an agency, because it feels like he's got a load of average coaches jobs this week, and he's put them into amazing positions that they probably wouldn't be in had he not been successful so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I thought, part of the Chelsea stuff around Pochettino, they want to, when they let him go, the talk was they want somebody to come in and do all the good stuff, but they also want that coach to be open to the idea that the ownership or the executive can make decisions about football matters. And I do think there is something, to the idea that a strong football executive working in tandem with a head coach or a manager is probably the right way to do it, right? Because even Edu this week was talking about how they sign players and the work that goes into it, the dossiers they have. But it's not him that makes the decision. It's not Arteta that makes the decision. There's a team of people behind that make the decision. But like you say, I think Arteta just has more stature, more control, and that, when you couple it with the ability that he has as a manager, as a coach, and as I suppose a leader for these players and these footballers who are willing to work so hard for him, that just gives him maybe something a little bit more in terms of like, okay, I think this is the way to go, and maybe that, not quite a veto, if you know what I mean, but maybe just that little bit of an edge.
Yeah, it's a bit of give and take. Like, I know that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang had been speaking yesterday about sort of his exit from the club. He kind of gave his side of the story. I think it was on a podcast. And the clip was circulating this morning from the All or Nothing documentary, in which Edu was sitting down with some of the other staff members and discussing kind of what they do with this. And you could tell that it wasn't, well, he's our highest paid player, he's a talented player, we have to find a way of getting him back in. There was clearly a consideration for what Mikel Arteta's stance on that situation was. Now, if that was Maurizio Pochettino at Chelsea, that conversation probably doesn't take place. If it's at Bayern Munich, that conversation probably doesn't take place. So the executive needs to be strong, needs to have input, needs to be there to kind of sanity check some of the decisions from the club's perspective. Because, we've seen it so many times. Managers come in at football clubs, they bring in a load of players, they invest heavily in a squad, And 6 months down the line, they're no longer there. So you have to make sure that the recruitment policy and the overall philosophy is one that's in line with the club, so that you're not reliant upon one man and it all falling down if he leaves. But there is clearly that respect between our sporting executives and Mikel Arteta that I don't think exists in all situations.
No, because those are relationships that are going to have to be built. I mean, in fairness, Edu and Arteta probably had to build a relationship when he came in first, and thankfully for us, it's gone well, and they seem to work. They seem to work very well together. They appear to be simpatico, and there are a lot of people behind the scenes as well doing stuff, which helps and facilitates the way we do things. Do you expect that deal to be announced sooner rather than later? It seems to me that even though they're saying talks are beginning, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they were a fairly long way down the road with this situation.
Yeah, I think conversations probably took place at some point during the season. It's very... I think Arsenal are very good at being strategic when they kind of release things like this and when they sort of confirm things like this. They'll probably wanted to have taken the temperature of the supporters at the end of the season. Obviously, everything was really, really positive in terms of the reaction to the campaign, albeit it didn't end the way that we wanted it to. So, yeah, I think that this is much further down the line than we know. The fact that people are talking about figures suggests that somewhere along the line, that's already been discussed. That's been, put out there. Again, they'll be taking the temperature of the fan opinion. I know that they do so much of that at Arsenal nowadays. I expect soon we'll hear some positive news.
All right. Well, look, it is a fairly quiet week, so I've asked our Discord members for a few questions that we can get our teeth into. So let's start with this one from PRS Books, who says, is this going to be a summer where our incomings depend on outgoings first? And if so, do you expect any of those to be done quickly, since most of the contenders to depart, he mentions players like Eddie Nketiah, Reece Nelson, Thomas Partey, Emile Smith-Rowe, aren't going to be at summer tournaments?
I think that some of these deals can be done quickly, but I don't think we're going to get the type of transfer fees that some Arsenal fans are expecting us to get. I look at players like Eddie Nketiah, for example, and, if you'd have gone back 6 months, people might have said, well, 25 million. He's a Premier League centre forward. Goals are the most valuable commodity in football, so we should at least be getting that. But then you look at the second half of the season where he's hardly kicked the ball, and you can't be naive enough to think that doesn't have any impact on his valuation.
Sure.
So if it is contingent, the business that we do in terms of incomings is contingent on getting people out the door, we might have to take a bit of a loss on some of these players based on what we maybe thought they were worth 6 months ago. And yeah, I think that's the only way we're going to do these deals quickly. Otherwise, Andrew, teams will sit on this. They will look at those players from a distance. They'll keep tabs on them. They'll be looking at it and saying, well, at some point, Arsenal are going to have to move them on so we can lowball them in the latter stages of the window. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I mean, the market dictates a lot, and you are not in some ways a slave to the market, but you have to be aware of how it works. I mean, there are so many facets as well. These players themselves might want to have some clarity on their situations. I think, when you say take a loss, it's interesting when you consider the likes of Nketiah, Nelson, Smith-Rowe, because they're homegrown. It's not so much a loss as a bit less than we might have thought we were going to get for these players, and their sales could well bolster the finances in a significant way, because they're booked as pure profit, I think, because they are homegrown. We didn't pay any transfer fee for them. We don't have to use the dreaded A word, amortization, and we're getting into the realms of Swiss ramble and stuff that breaks my brain open. But I have to say, I don't think our incoming business depends on outgoings per se. I mean, obviously you want those players, if you've decided they're surplus to requirements, the sooner they go, the better. The sooner you get the money in, the better. But Arsenal have finished second in the Premier League. There's significant prize money with that. There's significant prize money coming from getting to the Champions League quarterfinals as well. So I think Arsenal can count on a fair amount of spending money before they sell anyone.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think that they're going to be in a position where they literally can't move in the market until they get some of these players out. But I do think getting a lot of these players out will be in the thinking, more so from a kind of squad perspective than a monetary perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I know that Mikel Arteta likes to work with a smaller group than most. We've seen that. We've seen him, not rotate as much as maybe other managers do. We've seen him bring players into the club and quite quickly actually decide that, maybe he's not for me. I think the people that we might suffer a loss on are people like, for example, if he is to move on this summer, Fabio Vieira. You're not getting £35 million for Fabio Vieira now. You're not getting what we paid for Aaron Ramsdale, I don't think, now, if he's to move on as well. But to the point on sort of Nketiah and Emile Smith-Rowe, you're absolutely right about the homegrown thing. I just think with Nketiah, for example, when they gave him that 5-year deal on £100,000 a week or whatever it was reported to be, I do think that was with a view to trying to keep that valuation as high as it possibly could be. But the fact that he played so little in the second half of last season, I think has maybe undone that good work in sort of a business perspective. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there will be suitors for Eddie Nketiah? And maybe the question is, how much are Arsenal going to have to compromise on a potential fee? Because they did give him this new deal, and like a rising tide lifts all boats, and he signed a new deal at a time where lots of players had got big wage increases, and I don't mean to suggest he was saying I should be paid as much as them, but relatively speaking, if your highest earner goes here, then your lowest earner wants a little bit more as well, and that's just kind of how it works. But those are big wages for maybe, lower to mid-table Premier League clubs. That might require Arsenal to say, okay, we value Eddie at this, but in order for the club that's interested to afford him, we're going to have to lop a significant amount off the transfer fee so they can then cover those wages.
Yeah, as well, because Eddie's not going to want to go anywhere and earn a significantly lower wage than the one he earns now. So that club that are coming in for him, whoever that might be, are going to be in a position where they're going to try and get the best deal possible on the transfer fee. But there may be excuse or reasoning for not pushing beyond that is, hold on a minute, we need to pay this guy as well. We need to pay him week in, week out. I always think with transfer fees, when we look at, I know people love to look at net profit and all of that stuff. I always think that sometimes we go well overboard with that, because I think the actual strain on a football club is not financing 10, 15, 20 million pounds here or there over a period of time to do a deal. It's the wages. And I think that there is a lot more value in reducing your wage bill than necessarily earning an extra 5-6 million pound on a transfer fee. So I think that's what Arsenal will look at. And I think with Eddie Nketiah, they will have to compromise on the fee. I expect there to be clubs interested in him, but they're not going to be the highest of profile clubs.
No.
And therefore their spending power is going to be limited. So you're going to have to accept less. And because you've put him on that contract, which you thought was going to do you good in terms of the transfer fee, you might have to compromise even more, because he's probably going to want to negotiate a similar thing wherever it is that he ends up.
Yeah. Freddie LJ says, along the same kind of lines, we've talked about players who might go, Eddie, Reece, Smith-Rowe. He says, with the expected sales of a number of Hale-end products, graduates, I think, is a better word. Do we need to purchase homegrown qualified players? And is that going to be part of the way that Arsenal are planning this transfer window to maintain the homegrown quota?
I think they're going to have to think about that at some point, because if you lose a load of, the players that kind of make sure that you're staying within the rules on that, then you're going to have to look at that at some point. From what I've read and from what I sort of hear, it looks like Arsenal are starting to place a greater emphasis on bringing in younger players with a view to building them for the future. Maybe that's something that will be applied in that particular arm of the strategy, if you like. I don't know, but, this homegrown thing, like, clubs find ways around it, Manchester City have got Scott Carson sitting on their bench, and they've had him there for how many years, just collecting medals for doing absolutely zero to get around this thing. So I think there is an emphasis at Arsenal on Premier League experience when they're recruiting. Edu said as much in the last few days when he's been speaking. And so if you can tick both of those boxes, Premier League experience and homegrown, great, why not? But I don't think if Arsenal are looking to bring in 2 or 3 players for the first team, I don't think they're going to have too much of an issue with the homegrown thing, given that you can push some of the under 18s, some of the under 21s up into your registered squad and maybe get around that.
What about this? We had a couple like this. One from Nick Baker 11. He said, do Arsenal need to look to the lower leagues for young talent and get them out on loan purely as future profit? It feels like other teams are able to sell shite for decent money, and somehow we struggle to get anything for decent players with Premier League experience. Leno, for example. And Speckle Jim asks, we've had some fantastic success recruiting from within the Premier League recently, but do we need to have more of a look at talent from the Championship? He cites Eze and Wharton, Crystal Palace as good examples. Andy Robertson going from Hull to Liverpool back in the day. They were a Premier League side back then rather than lower league, or maybe they got relegated that season. I can't quite remember. But, what about that point about bringing in players from maybe the Championship? I think there's only so far down you can go in order to bolster the squad. Is that something Arsenal can do? Or is this sort of aligned with the idea, when we talk about young players at academy level, can they make the breakthrough? Can they push on? The reality is that the higher the level of the team, the more difficult it is for academy players to break through. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Arsenal went through some difficult years, and you have players like Smith Rowe, like Saka, like Nketiah, Nelson, etc. as part of the squad. And I just mean that the opportunity was there for them. It's not a reflection of how good they are or how good they aren't or anything like that. But that sort of lowering of the standards allows the opportunity for those players to come through. Is it a case that Arsenal right now, if we want to make the next step to be a Premier League winning team, we're going to have to continue to buy from the Premier League rather than try and unearth gems at Championship level who could come good but probably need time?
I think you've got to look at it as 2 separate operations. So operation number 1 is make it a winning team. And in that case, I think you probably do need to recruit from Europe's top leagues, because that's the only way you're going to find players that are of the standard required and are able to come in and do a job straight away. But also we've seen clubs like Chelsea, for example, do a really good job of turning their academy into a big profit maker, which in turn funds your project higher up the line when you're trying to become a winning team. So I think you've got to look at it as 2 separate things. I covered a fair few of the under-21s games, the Premier League 2 games last season, on commentary. And I did it with a few different ex-Arsenal players over the course of the season. But the one thing that all of them said was that the gap between academy football and first-team football, at Arsenal especially, has never been bigger. It's never been greater. And the issue that they have with the current model and the current setup is that you've got players in the Arsenal academy knocking about playing under 18s, under 21s, which is great, but they've got no experience. They haven't gone out and played senior football. Whereas in the Championship, you might pick up an 18, 19-year-old that's played 50, 75 games. And that is way more valuable to a lot of these ex-pros than actually you playing academy football for 2-3 seasons. So that's where the problem is, I think. And that's why we look at that group of young players that we have. And I know a lot of people say, look at this player, look at that player. I would probably say there are 2 or 3 that I look at and I think you could make the step up. But outside of that, you're probably going to have to sell those guys on, try and make some profit that way. And so in answer to the original question about do we need to go and dip into the lower leagues, I think we should do that. But I think that should be 75% because of the fact that we're trying to make our academy more profitable. And if we catch these players earlier and when they're at lower profile clubs, we can then sell them on for a profit. But also, if you do find those gems, then make sure that pathway is there to promote them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been interesting is reading stories about how Arsenal are now going to invest more in transfers on academy players. And I think that tells you something about what they want to do. There's a long game going on. They want to raise the level, but it might also tell you that there are gaps, in the underage squads where they think, okay, in order to have a generation and another generation of players who are knocking at the door, whether they get into the first team squad or not, but we need them to be knocking at the door. They've got to invest money in these players. They're not all going to come from the academy, and I think that will become cyclical, hopefully, where you start to produce players who can do that. And then you look at some of the guys who are out on loan this season, names that people were talking about very seriously. Some people, I should say, like, we've got to get this guy in the team. We've got to get him in the team. And Charlie Patino is an example, or Brooke Norton-Cuffy. And, they've gone out on loan and they have found that the step up from academy football at Arsenal to something like the Championship has been really challenging for them. So I don't know how people expect those players to then make the step up from academy to the Arsenal first team. Like, it is a huge gap. And I think you need to be extraordinarily talented. You need to be like a 1 in 100,000 or 1 in a million talent to make that step up now. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they manage those young players and manage the trajectories of those young players with loans. Micah Beereth, perhaps the one who demonstrated the most on loan this season, went to Sturm Graz, won the title there. But even then, is he going to be good enough to stake a claim for a place up front for Arsenal? I don't think so.
This is the thing as well. Like, you talk about going and getting players from other clubs at academy level and trying to bring them through to fill those gaps. And I agree with that. That is a good way to go. But not many clubs are in the position that Arsenal are in today, where they've got somebody like Bukayo Saka, who's literally the talisman of the side, who went down that route. Now, you're not always going to have those examples to hold up to young players and say, look, at my club, there is a pathway. We're competing at the very top of the division. We're playing in the Champions League. It's such an attractive football club to be at. But guess what? It isn't a closed shop. We've got people in our first team squad. And one of them is literally leading this team, who has done that journey and has been on that path and has been down that road. That is a massive tool to use when trying to attract these players. So cash in on the fact that we have that today and that we're in that position, and go and raid all the sort of Championship clubs for their best talent. And if 2 or 3 of them turn you a profit and one of them makes it into the first team, you've done your bit.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. All right, let's do one final one. This is, I guess, more hope than expectation. But Gabby Goal says, do you expect Man City to have a post-Ferguson United, maybe even a post-Wenger Arsenal, that kind of a fall-off if the rumours about Pep Guardiola leaving are true, regardless of the conclusion of the 115 charges? What can we expect from Manchester City if and when Pep goes? And there's talk about him leaving next summer. And, if he wanted to leave this summer, be my guest. I'd be quite happy with that.
If Pep Guardiola leaves Manchester City at the end of next season and there is no drop-off, I don't know how I'm going to cope with that.
Yeah.
Because I have been banking on that for the last 3 years. I've been waiting for him to just say that he's going and to walk away. Look, I think they've got an incredibly talented group of players. They're not going to ease up on their spending. They are in that world now, Manchester City, unless something comes from those 115 charges that leads to them having to change the operation. Let's assume they're going to continue the way they are. They're always going to be up there. They're going to be strong. But will they hit these heights under another manager? I can't with any degree of certainty say they will, because for me, despite all the talk about the charges, Pep Guardiola is the best manager in world football. He is that good. His brand of football is incredible. I know he's only done it at big clubs or clubs with big resources. That's the common criticism that's thrown his way. But he's raised the bar, Andrew, to a whole new level. We're talking about Arsenal winning 28 of their Premier League games, getting an incredible points return, incredible goal difference, goal scored, and we still couldn't win the title. How many times did Liverpool have unbelievable seasons, 96, 97 points, and not win it? So he has raised the bar incredibly high. I think it's fair to believe that when he goes, there will be some drop-off. I'm not saying they're going to end up like Manchester United or like Chelsea knocking around in mid-table, but there is going to be a drop-off that should open the door for the likes of Arsenal if we're still ready at that point to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so too. It seems unfathomable to me that a manager like Guardiola, as much as I find him weird and creepy and annoying, he is unquestionably, a brilliant manager. Everybody says it. And that point about, well, he's only done it at the big clubs. Well, the big clubs hire the best people.
Exactly. You're not going to take a poor job, are you? Because you just want to prove to everybody that you can do it there. You're going to take the best job that's on offer, and that's what he's had. The best offers.
Let's see Guardiola do it with, I don't know, Hull City or something. It's like, come on, be real. But hopefully that drop off, I think it would be fair and right and only proper for the game of football itself if that drop off began immediately, and next season they don't do anything quite as good as they did this time around. Right, we had better leave it there. Harry, before we go, just tell people where they can find you and your stuff.
Thank you for having me. It's been great fun. You can find me on the Chronicles of a Gooner, which is an Arsenal podcast. It's nowhere near as good as this one, but do give it a listen, give it a chance. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual places, and you can follow me on X. I keep going to say Twitter, but it's X now.
No, we've got to call it. We've got to call it Twitter, and not giving into this sort of rebranding nonsense. All right. Well, listen, we'll catch up with you hopefully during the summer. But for now, Harry, take it easy, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much indeed to Harry. You can find him on Twitter. He is at Harry Symeou, and you'll find links to all of his stuff there, podcasts, YouTube, and all the rest in his bio there on Twitter. So thank you again to him. I did mention that we were going to give you the winner of our competition, which is for a book called Is Yours Gold by Darren Berry, looking back at the invincible season. Of course, the question was about who Arsenal beat on the opening day of that season. The answer was Everton. And the winners are, we have got one copy of the book to give away, a copy of the book and a badge, and then we've got 2 badges to give away, gold trophy badges. The winner of the book is Adrian Hart. Well done to you. And the winners of the badges are Holly. No surname on that particular email as the random number generator picked it out. And Tony Fole. I will be in touch with all of you guys by email. We'll get your details. We'll get those prizes sent out to you. And if you look in the show notes right now, you can buy that book with a 20% discount by using the code GOLD20. You can go to legendspublishing.net to find the book there, or you can choose the link, which is in the show notes, in the description right now. If you want 20% off, that is how you do it. So thank you to Darren for giving us those prizes, and well done to the winners. Right, that's about that for this week's show. Fingers crossed we get a bit of sunshine this weekend. James and I will have an Arsecast extra for you, I think possibly on Sunday. I'll double check though, but I think that's right. It's going to be Sunday this week, so you can join us for that. As ever, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, downloading, sharing, subscribing, all the things you do with a podcast, as well as putting it in your ears. We really do appreciate it. We will catch you on the next one, folks. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye.